it's my great pleasure to invite the Artistic Director for London Design Biennale 2025 to the stage to introduce his vision and theme for 2025. Samuel Ross, with Yi Eng, CEO of SRA and co-founder of A Cold Wall.
Firstly, it's an absolute joy to be here with you all, to catch wind and know that there are more than 50 representative countries here to share the future of design is an absolute joy. And I'm aware that for those who may not know me, I first want to shed a little bit of light on what I do and how that will inform the talk and the topic of surface reflections to come. So for those that don't know, I am an artist and designer, truly focused on how the body responds to material that is imbued with historic and cultural means of exploring topics such as public space and anthropology. Typically, this takes shape through 3 to 4 different ventures or avenues, you could say, most of them commercial. So the first is through fashion, through luxury menswear, a label I founded in 2015 titled A Cold Wall, founded in the Midlands within the UK, which is often described as architecture for the body, and it sequesters the notion of what it is to be British, but also to be other and to move up and down the different class systems of this country. The second is through luxury industrial design, the notion of beautification and what Britain can say in the advent of luxury goods on a global scale. Through our design venture, Yi and I co-founded SRA. The third is through the Black British Artist Grant Programme. Now, after the success of the first 2 ventures, it made sense to kind of deliver some type of meritocracy into play. We decided to take annual profits, a portion of that annually, and put those into grants, which are really focused on stimulating POC advents and narratives within design. And the fourth, which is a little bit more of a personal endeavour, is the work I partake in as an artist, sculptor, and painter. As we move on to the main intent of surface reflections, the core intention here is as follows. It's to encourage global identities and personal experiences, shaping both research and practical components of regional contributions. It is to celebrate the variances present across humanity. The second component, a return to and rediscovery of what material and process can mean and signify when considering material composition and properties, alongside our relationships to tech and user case studies that incorporate regional requirements on the global stage. To a degree, this is about resituating the notion of material and meaning, taking what is of the past and reinvigorating that for the future. To a degree, it's looking at pre-existing systems and philosophies such as animism and finding how adding and imbuing more character can assist with the future of the design industry. In doing so, it's about developing an end-to-end journey, and each contribution with a sense of humanity and intimacy. It's about fostering abstract and elastic thinking and allowing global narratives to establish. So to really compress all that down, it's encouraging global and personal narratives. It's imbuing abstract thinking and atypical thinking to develop new design narratives. And it's a realignment of what it is to be a maker and what it is to bring forward the next chapter of craft and production. These are some notes I've been thinking over for some time in one of my sketch pads, and this idea of geographic distortions, body and space, and living amongst a borderless community. Some of these opening thoughts include mobility and the encouraging of idea exchange through blurred borders, questioning the impact of emotional design, and amplifying the contribution of personal, intimate design journeys. The physicality of a spiritual body, colour and form as a primer, a social language. It is redemptive, it's also fleeting, it's cathartic, it is a paradigm itself that needs no literacy. What I'm trying to grapple with here is the idea of design not just being a discipline, but more so an operating system that has several silos that we're able to plug and play with and tap into. You know, design's true strength is that it is a platform. It has no borders and it has no thresholds. It is a medium of experience and it is a literacy of optimism. It is both an act of service, but also a generational gift that's often inherited and must also be bestowed. So chapter 1, meaning, utility, identity, and expression. The Holy Well, seen on screen, represents and reflects the objective of surface reflections. It's to utilize design principles to imbue regional values into physical solutions. Expressive and lucid start points seem to offer a deeply personal and human character. Generating meaning seems to unlock through the most simple and clear of processes, hence why I thought it relevant to share an iterative sketch from my practice there. So in terms of the pondering thoughts and meanings of surface reflection, I wanted to kind of focus on 3 different components which really inspired and influenced the thinking here. One, of course, being, In Praise of Shadows, which is a favorite text written in the early 20th century in Tokyo by a brilliant orator, and it really focuses on the celebration of one's own culture and preserving that on the global stage consciously. The second would be an animist shrine, Shinto shrine, located in Kyoto, and it's the animist belief that an intimate object can convey properties of the living. The notion of the maker's hand, of course, is present, and the imperfect is celebrated. It lives beyond its completion. And the third is a favorite book of mine that I often return to, that being the book of Ecclesiastes and the revelations that it puts forward. The fleeting nature of life, its patterns and cycles and changes, driving emotive and informed, urgent formats of creativity with awareness of our time and the end, always at the top of the mind. So we really focus on observing the grey area for a second and this lapse in time we live between one's heritage and genealogy and what it is to exist in a multicultural and modern society. I thought it best here to look into some of my own recent DNA test findings, in which I found out I have, of course, as you can imagine, quite an affinity to West Africa, though I come by way of the Caribbean, St. Vincent and Barbados to be specific. Now, there's a lived experience that one may have being British, but also being of the world. And I thought it was interesting to harness and observe the now. I think the Barrier Block in Brixton is a very good example of the day-to-day experience of what it is to live in modernity, but also to harness a focus on the genealogy of one's sense of self in the past, hence why the shrine is focused on screen. The Red Clay Shrine and the Brixton Public Housing allegory capture a view of interior and exterior variables. How do we express this global and local? How do we retain our genealogy whilst contributing to modernity? So location and origin are 2 key factors within this briefing: generational identities, understanding who we are through symbolic objects and effigies. These are generational obligations we must hand down to preserve, renew, and advance regional design propositions. So, modernity's tension, the present, the past, and the eternal. Naturally, within this briefing, we are looking and seeking participants to come forward with hypervisual solutions that place materiality at the center of the ideas to be expressed. Diverse perspectives should be heavily developed and challenge pre-existing viewpoints. Both examples on screen capture a level of distinction we'd like to imagine being produced through this year's theme. A second component. Now, of course, La Soufrière in St. Vincent, one place I call home across generations, and of course the depiction of Mount Vesuvius, one being immediately recent and one, of course, being an eternal truth. What I'm trying to get to here is that the pressure to develop newness should remain an existential pressure at all times. Global design should respond to pressing matters, be it pressing such as climate change that we continue to battle and gripe with across millennia, or as fleeting as intangible and expiring principles and allegories. Essence, through artisanal production and means of expression, process ritual. What I'd like to get to here through this is regional processes and means of production being embraced and remaining a priority on the global stage through the Biennale. The proposition of being able to reinvent what already exists or to rediscover new cadences and techniques that perhaps we haven't yet been exposed to. We'd like to, of course, see a focus on crafting, meeting a spirit of newness in this way. Two examples of pre-existing design philosophies by some of the greats, Super Studio and, of course, Arakawa's Biosleeve House. Now, these are well-known examples of what the advent of the future could have potentially looked like 70 years ago, but I do fear that at times we tend to stick a little bit too harshly to this particular phase of design thinking. Our duty is, of course, to add new chapters rather than to extend past cycles. Again, here's another application, most recently, of both Hepworth and, of course, the line, which is very close to the references we looked at, which were, of course, cooked, you could say, 50 years ago. These are proofs of concept at this point, but what we're really looking for in this briefing is to contest and spur what is next to come, what is our next view of the future that each country can perhaps contribute. And again, this is a symptom of what happens when we don't react and respond, and when we don't harbour and foster new ideas, and when we do fester on the past. A time of reset arrives and the sunken cost fallacy of postmodernism in architecture comes about. Now, what we're looking at here on screen, these are, again, various examples of ghost architecture from across the world. I've purposely taken off all of the locations because it's not one particular geography's responsibility or obligation. It's more so a crisis in the way in which we think about the future of design to be applied through, in this case, the means of architecture. These are sluggish virtues in what powers and drives growth, meaning, and results. And I fundamentally feel that this is a really important pyramid to start on because it's an analogy for a trickle-down of what happens in the wider remit of design. At times, we can end up with soulless and synthetic results, and this is an example of the exclusion and lack of regional contributions within design. Now, ghost architecture's vacuum as a whole and its loss of meaning is partly responsible for sparking this inquiry of surface reflections. The importance of restoring a closeness to land, to personal history, and to origin remains incredibly urgent. Our connection to location and region is as impactful and intimate as the layers of the epidermis. There are a few visual examples that I will quickly skip through that capture the essence and resonance of design being imbued with intergenerational response and resolve. Most of these are well known, but as visual stimuli, I think it's good to have this at the forefront of our mind. So the Dogon Gina, of course, is emotional, it's functional, it's rich in character, and of course its materials are site-specific. The traditional Edo period tatami room in Kyoto. I found this to be quite interesting when you consider, some of the dynamics and levers that Britain is going through on the world stage currently. Balderstone in Bordeaux and in the Lake District is such a great example of the maker's hand and identity and signature being present. Local means of production and sustainable means that influence the end experience and character. Of course, here we have Ronderville huts. It's not just about function. You can feel the priority and the essence and the closeness of locality come about through material and character here. Francis Carrier's work I could speak about for millennia, as it is able to mediate surface and identity and sustainable means of production so well whilst retaining local narratives that continue to take shape. So what this means, if I kind of whittle this back down into an allegory, the previous examples celebrate the characteristics of an interconnected compound, each unique ripple a fragment of the collective form. We wish to harness such dynamism with this year's participants. This is the allegory of surface reflections. And I'll quickly skip through a few examples of how this informs my own practice. It would be insane to put this forward and not show you proof of concept. So these are recent sculptural forms developed and showcased at Chatham House. We have Fire Open Stone, which was shown with Friedman Bender Gallery in New York in May as part of a wider show, and it's formed of granite, concrete, honey, turmeric, sheet metal, engraved serial codes. There's a pooling of material with the idea and proportion of creating new materials that come about. But there's also something that feels quite deeply human and sacred about this work. Caucus, which was shown in Design Miami, Paris, in, I believe it was September of last year. It looks sunnier than it was in the picture. Caucus is close to 4 meters in length, and it's an anamorphic bodily form. The idea here is to purport a jolt of expression and optimism across the public forum. It seems to become part of its environment through its silhouetting and vignetting. So to close on the first chapter, meaning, to really compress all of this down, it's about conveying diverse aesthetic identities. It's about celebrating regional specific materials and journeying into local inquiries. So with meaning outlined, which is very philosophical, very nice, how do we apply these values and sentiments practically? How are they utilized effectively within the design process? Well, that's done through function. The meaning discussed feeds the development. For two levers to establishing a format of sorts to apply meaning to, applicable to real-time scenarios. So why? Why do we want to imbue meaning and function together? Well, for newness to come about. For newness to come to the top of personal and commercial experiences within design. It's the elasticity in the process that we are looking to mine for and generate. The idea being to counter expected commercial design processes with inherently expressive artistic processes that leverage a practitioner's life experiences and past exposures to humanize and ensure variation in outcome, thus enabling equally yoked perspectives that consider global south and north economic variables as a matter of parity. So we have some sketches here to try and visualize this thinking, and it's very simple. It's just simply a system of two different mechanisms that we have. There are two levers involved here. Lever one is re-engaging historic underpinnings, as mentioned, and lever two, also partly mentioned, is applying your personal lived experience, and it's about pulling on those levers together to help shape a system or a function to generate newness on demand. It's about applying these at varying tensiles and levels of intensity dependent on the brief that one will be tackling. Some more sketches here. On one side, on the left-hand side, you can see the model in place is quite methodical. It's R&D and it's logic, and it's taking user experiences, and then it's coming with an iterative outpoint. Now, micro-iterations tied to problem solving for public consumption seem to be quite slow and often miss the mark if we consider the focus on ghost architecture as an advent of that. What I'm proposing to be funneled through the Biennale brief, where we can afford to be a lot more radical and a lot more elastic, is a lot more of an abstract and a deeply emotional and personable approach. The objective is to use one's life experience really as intellectual property to drive newness. Again, here's a quick visual summary of what was just mentioned, pooling in the ever-ending existential threat that we most tackle, again captured in the Le Soufrière 2021 Vincentian eruption. And I bring this up because I was just there with family members a month before this eruption took place, and it completely reconstituted how one actually can traverse the island now. So it's a very palpable matter. So it's about changing and getting rid of means that are too slow to meet or extend the user expectations that we're seeing globally. We're aiming to oppose this way of engaging with design and seeing the world. These are micro-iterations that do not capture the agility of modernity when considering design as a multi-use platform or operating system. We are after more so elastic iterations. We wish for designers, artists, and thinkers to journey. With that, of course, comes risk, flux, and a deeply human sense of storytelling. It's elastic thinking rooted in personal traits tied to self, journey, and location. So, how do we apply meaning and foundation? And for this, I will invite my business partner, Yi, to talk about application. Thank you.
The theme of Surface Reflections will also probe an application of design thinking that mediates abstract emotive meanings and utility, the commoditizing of expression, and the dynamism between art and commerce, with a few examples of what we've done with our studio to follow. The objective is to lead change through iteration that establishes new IP creations, subsequently shifting user behavior in their daily rituals. The consumer thus forms part of the design process. With the SRA collaboration with Kohler, the use of recycled epoxy materials from both new patents for the faucet design, but also for water flow. The personification of water delivery through color and form in a historic context of water is performed by the user in their most daily rituals. The second, our previous partnerships with Nike. The thesis of addressing overconsumption through the iterative process of footwear creation with Nike and a Cold War led to deconstruction. This led to the design process of removing PU coatings and iterative local dye trials in our London studio. This process exposed UV light, expediting the aging process of the shoe, resulting in varying patinas dependent on the exposure to UV and city pollution of the user. Here, the engagement within the product probes the life cycle of a product through the embracement of use and aging, while celebrating the imperfection and human hand within a mass-distributed product. Samuel's trauma chair furthers the role of design in reconciling with personal identities and the way material and process can form a dialogue for broader social topics. We have a few more examples about this application of design thinking and its varied impact. An example is a Cold War's first retail stores in Shanghai and Beijing, where the bold intensity of a custom Volt color amidst a wireframe construction nods to the merging of digital and physical worlds. Samuel's exhibition Land at White Cube, where a series of abstract paintings and sculpture, which uses the imagery of collapsed landscapes and supine bodies, explore the subject of the Black experience. Samuel's art exhibited here, as he previously mentioned, at Chatham House, also pull formal through lines that collide West African furniture archetypes with Eurocentric tropes of modernism, brutalism, and color theory. A similar example, as he mentioned, of course exhibition at Friedman Bender. Beats Power Beats Pro, a role that Samuel in the studio holds overseeing design, which led to the development of not just increased color profiles, but also the most sustainable packaging across the entire group. And lastly, a Cold War product that was exhibited at Victoria and Albert Museum that positions a gilet as a personal protective architecture for the body. So to summarize the three applications that Samuel and I have taken everyone through, the first being abstract emotive design thinking should view commercial design and research-based design. The second being design choices that reflect various geographic and historic canons of thought. And the last, the expansion of traditional craft and making allegories that enrich daily experiences with object and space.